Christian. Super fun to be connecting with you back on the podcast for the third time, I believe.
Yep. Number three.
Yeah. How's it going? It's been a minute since we talked.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a little over a year. Is that right?
My God. I don't know. Um, it's possible, but
I,
you
yeah,
know,
I didn't go back and look at our first two talks. I mean, I kind of thought it would be interesting one day to really listen to the three conversations in a row or more if we talk more in the future, because, we'd really get a sense of this pandemic period. And so I thought if I go back and listen to anything that I said earlier, it would sort of contaminate that experience. So I remember bits and pieces of what we talked about, but I'm pretty sure we talked for the first time like around 2 years ago, and the last time was about a year ago. That's my guess.
yeah, yeah. Well, how have you been feeling since then? Have you been staying busy? I actually heard a little bit through the grapevine of something you might be working on, but I thought I'd let you speak about whatever you have going on.
I mean, essentially, I think what I use this pandemic period to do. I mean, it did lots of things to me, and there's very little I think I did within it. But one of the things I did do was really just decide I needed to make more money. I mean, it's something I just never prioritized, And I'm 46 now, and I remember early in the pandemic, I thought, well, maybe it's time. Maybe there's a reason people, try to make more money and put money in the bank. So, I had I had a few kind of screenwriting things here and there, but I had never made a sustained effort to become a well-paid screenwriter. So, that's sort of what I did. And um, I guess the first deals really started to close about a year ago. And I don't want to talk too much about the projects themselves because they're in
Yeah.
process and still delicate, but so far I've been able to land projects that, again, I became a screenwriter to make money. I mean, that is the fundamental reason. I love the theater, and if I could have made a good living doing it, I would have just been in the theater forever. But I have found projects that are interesting, that are investigating things that I think are real, and uh, they've activated parts of my psyche that are difficult and challenging, just like writing a play or something. So yeah, I've been doing that. That's what I've been doing on the work level, at least.
I don't mean this with any judgment. This is a genuine question because, like, I think about this too. But when you said like you got into screenwriting for the money, and I'm not saying that's good or bad, but with that intention in mind, I mean, was that hard, like, as an artist to because I'm imagining you didn't get into playwriting for the money, for instance, right? You did
No,
it because you had a very vested interest in expressing yourself through that medium, and I don't know, it's a dying breed of people who are strictly playwrights and don't write for film or TV or other mechanisms or have a Substack or whatever it is to make it sustainable. Does it feel like a slippery slope for you to do that, or did it change how you feel as an artist trying to express yourself or not?
here's what I think. I mean, I feel like I grew up. I was born in 1975. I was sort of the end of this, what I think of as like a time where you could exist without really having to overly think about your public image. A word like brand, never even occurred to us, in the 90s, for example. I mean,
Yeah.
that's when my career began, and I barely thought of myself at all as having a public persona, even. But, I think to me, the big shift in my mind has been okay, the things that really interest me, like inwardness and lack of ego, those things are just kind of disappearing from the culture. I mean, one thing I loved about theater was it's a real collaboration, a true collaboration.
Yeah,
So I may
very
write
much.
the play, but we all have to come together and figure it out. And I had a huge interest in psychoanalysis to the extent that I underwent a psychoanalysis, which I think we talked about in the past. And I was on the couch 5 days a week for 13 years. That kind of thing almost never happens anymore. And again, it's that kind of inwardness and dismantling of ego, that I love, that just makes me feel like I'm connected to something true. And, both those things, I mean, one is more private than the other, but they both involve real collaborations with other people and other subjectivities. And, I think what I feel now is, and I hate to be so simplistic about it, but sometimes I think the truth is pretty simple. I mean, social media just like changed everything. And everyone now, in my field at least, is concerned in some way with, you know, communicating their identity as separate and distinct from everybody else's. And look, I think that leaks over into other realms, and I think there's way more identification with ego today, way more like constant announcement of self and identity, and there may be good things about that, but me being who I am, how I'm built, that isn't what I like. I like reducing my ego and questioning it and deconstructing it and discovering things that don't fit with how I think of myself. And, theater and psychoanalysis, those were two worlds in which I could do that. So, uh, basically what that means is I decided not to become a psychoanalyst because I just don't think you are going to find many people who want to be on the couch 4 or 5 days a week. And theater is changing. I mean, I'm still looking for my collaborations that resonate with how I like to work, but I feel like theater is becoming much more a sort of self-branding exercise for individual artists in it and for the theaters that are producing the work. And so, if I can't make money doing what I love in the theater, I had to figure out a way to do it somewhere else. And I guess my idea is if I can make way more money than I could ever make in the theater, that maybe I'll have some, flexibility to discover or invent other ways of, you know, spending time on this earth with people, with like-minded people that I just don't know yet. The sort of usual avenues that were open to me have closed or complicated, and I haven't yet, figured out what I can build creatively to make up for that loss.
Yeah. Did you say when you said you were on the couch 5 days a week, you mean you had sessions 5 days a week for 13 years?
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't know that.
I really went all the way. Yeah, I did. Like, I mean, I don't even know that my analyst. I ended psychoanalysis 2017, so it's a little while now. But I don't even know that he necessarily would have wanted to go 5 days a week. But I really pushed for it. I said that's what I wanted, and I felt like this is my one chance to really, really go there. So the more, the merrier.
That's wild. I mean, in some ways, I mean, I wouldn't say that's the norm. I mean, therapy has certainly become perhaps more recognized in the norm over the years, but I wanna, like, pick apart this idea about how you're into inwardness, as am I. I think we both take sort of our own unique roads into it, but this idea of, lack of ego, and I know you're also very interested in the shadow. Uh, and it seems like, though, let me just throw this out there. Like what's happening now, if people maybe are just sort of like chickens with their heads cut off, or just kids running around who just don't know any better, in a lot of ways, what's coming up is the shadow for everybody because there's less places to hide, perhaps, in our typical comforts that we had in like the Clinton era and so forth. Like people, I mean, are definitely like doubling down to hold on to it and to strengthen, like the world of TikTok and social media, as you spoke to, and these mechanisms of entertainment to keep us feeling like okay. But at the same time, it seems like there's like a tilling of the soil where things are pretty worked up. So, do you see like working inside uh, the world of the screen as something that is still subversive for you, or do you not even have that agenda? Or do you feel like, I mean, how divorced are you from like the whatever kind of advocacy you're trying to do or intention you might have with the work you're making in that medium inside this whatever the fuck is going on right now?
Well, I think if I understood your question correctly, I mean, I don't even really think of my work as being able to have much of an impact anymore. I mean, I just feel like the world of social media just, I mean, people on their phones all day, this digital life. I mean, I think that is too powerful. Like, what I used to think about what I did was that I created complexity and tension and a sense of inwardness in the audience of whoever was watching my plays. And I think it's easy to forget that there wasn't that much competition, say 15, 20 years ago, if you were trying to capture the attention of the public in some way. I mean,
Hmm.
there were albums and TV shows and movies and plays and novels and
But
books of
fewer
poetry.
outlets too, right?
Right. But,
Yeah.
it wasn't, there were like five or six things really, if you wanted to get attention for yourself. And, obviously that's been democratized through smartphones, computers, social media. And again, I think there's probably some good things about that. But for somebody like me, like, I wanted to create work that could make an impact, even if a small impact, a genuine impact on my community. And I just don't feel that when everybody's on their phones. I don't feel like a play stands out. I don't feel like a movie stands out. And there's so much more content as well. It's not just a matter of, there were fewer channels, to get culture out there. Now everybody's doing it. So, I don't feel like I make a difference with my work. And I don't mean that in a, like, nobody would ever see it and be moved by it. I just mean its relationship to the broader culture has changed because of technological changes. So I think that that's what I think has been my real crisis, as an artist.
Is it, I mean, you're saying because it's watered down in a way, there's a saturation of content, so just inherently it's a numbers game. It's like, how can you stand out or have meaning when it went from a lake to an ocean?
Sure. I mean, if you'd seen a play of mine 20 years ago, maybe, you read a newspaper that day for an hour, and maybe you saw one TV show that day. You probably didn't see a movie if you were seeing my play that day. A cultural work could stand out in a certain way. Now, whoever is seeing your play, saw 700 TikToks that day, and scrolled through 400 Instagram posts and stories, and uh, you know 97 tweets, and so not to mention the 48 texts they got, and the three group chats where 74 people chimed in. I mean, it's a completely different psychic reality. And yeah, to me, maybe some very confident person out there could argue that they feel their play is so good it cuts through all that. But I just literally think people's brains are changing, their psyches are changing,
Yeah.
and so I just don't think things penetrate the way they used to. And I was a playwright because I wanted to get in there. I wanted to go deep in people's psyches in a way that would nestle there and create something, in the days and weeks that followed. Um, they're seeing my play. So yeah, I think that shift is just huge for me, and it's meant really trying to like reimagine really every aspect of my life, because being an artist was so central to my identity.
Oh man, it sounds like you're saying you're not an artist anymore. I mean,
I'm
just
not.
because
Yeah,
just
I'm
because
not
you
an.
went into screenplays, it's not exactly like a massive lateral shift there. You
Well,
know.
but it's not. I don't think of it as being an artist in the way that I don't think of writing plays now, as I used to think of it. Because the landscape has changed. I think these works change too. At least
Yeah.
they change what they can do in my mind. And again, there may be playwrights who are like, yeah, I don't care. I'm happy for my play to be, you know, 2 hour interruption of somebody's, social media diet, and that's fine. But I didn't, I didn't want to be just part of a landscape of content. That was never my
Ah.
desire. And so I think that to me is the big difficulty. I just think any content creator now, any artist, any entertainer, anybody who's posting, I mean, it's everything is in some way reduced to content. You're part of that stream of content that people are constantly swimming in, and so I'm still doing the work I do, and I still try to make it truthful, and I believe in it. Insofar as I always want to make a work of art that is deep and true, and even if it's a piece of entertainment, I want it to have truth and depth in it. I just don't think movies, TV, anything, film, theater, books, it can't do today what it used to do. And again, maybe that's fine, and things change, and people, societies change. But I still have that memory of when there wasn't much, out there. You would go and you would find that book or find that play, and it would get through, and it would change your life. I mean, that's just what
Mm.
I think of as being an artist.
Hmm. I mean, I absolutely think about being part of the stream and, whether we're receiving the stream, but it's a one thing to be creating content into it. And, my natural reaction is, oh, what I really want is to pull out of XYZ, like no social media. And it's sort of this purist attitude. I'll just record music and release that. And that's pretty much it. And if you want to find out about it, there'll just be a website with dates. And I know of two artists that I know that I follow who are like that. And there's something about it I kind of admire, of course, because it just seems like an attitude of not wanting to participate, but still wanting to create. But a part of me still knows, like, is it really relative like that? Can you pick and choose, or does it even matter at all if you're trying to decide to what degree you're engaging? And you get into all these contradictions about when it becomes your job and you're making a living, like you were saying. It's like, well, you just needed to make money, and you want to make money, and so there are certain choices that come along with that. And I'm sure it's not at all black and white for you. Like you're making sort of nuanced decisions there about how far you want to go in this direction or that direction. Like you still need to feel inspired as a writer. But hey, I think about that a lot. It's like no one wants to feel like they're part of a problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that I mean that's just perfectly said. I feel like I'm part of a problem, and the problem is uh, wanting people to look at me. And if you have a culture where there's millions of people who, in their own sphere, are having to constantly say, "Look at me," what is that? What kind of world is that? And it's it incentivizes certain behaviors and simplicities and provocations and dramas that don't interest me. And also, I just don't think a society of millions of people saying, "Look at me," like, what is that? That's messed up. Even if you're like,
Weird.
you do deep work and you're trying to do something really, you know, meaningful beyond your own ego, you're still having to sell it in this, marketplace of self. And so I kind of feel like, that the form of our culture really impacts the content of the work. And I have no answers, for it. I mean, certainly I flirted with that idea of you just do your work and you have no self promotional apparatus behind you. But that doesn't, unless you're really really successful already, that doesn't really work.
Yeah.
You have to find some way to sort of let people know who you are and what you're doing. But yeah, it's me then participating in something that I think, well, this isn't a good society when everybody wants to be paid attention to. That's like a kind of psychosis of just a shattered individualism. A collective of individuals isn't really a collective, right? It's just a kind of psychotic individualism, screaming and making noise and drawing attention to itself. So that's the bleak way of putting it. But yeah, I mean, I'm it's not like I decided to change professions and just get rich. I mean, I'm still trying to use the things I like to do and care about, as a way of making money and, building whatever nest egg I think I need to, figure out new ways of interacting with people and organizing.
I mean, that is the mass psychosis that maybe really is going on, is this the society of me. And clearly the other polarity to that would be the society of us. But it seems like the more we get into this isolated sense of self and separateness, not only does that create a lot of problems for society, which we're seeing, but it also creates a lot of problems for the individual. I mean, it's very depressing to feel more and more isolated and like meaninglessness of just you in this universe. And that's why I'm very drawn to art that makes me feel more connected to all that is psychedelics, nature, good friendship, and things like synchronicities that sort of they kind of mess with my idea that it's meaningless. Um, let me bring something up for you. I actually have a quick question for you. When I when I was in Mexico recently, and you and I connected. When you text me, I'll give people the backstory here in a second. Had you heard from our friends to say that I was there?
I'm trying to remember.
Because they
Uh,
said no.
they said that they had not told me.
Yes. This is not totally fantastical, but I still found it kind of interesting. So I was down in Mexico City, and you had introduced me to Santiago Sierra Solar. That's his full
Hmm.
name, right? And his partner Reed, and we met up in New York. He's a great director. They both do photography, cinematography. But that was a while ago, like a year ago. And I was down there, and I was walking down the street, and I don't normally remember these sorts of things, but it just came to me. I was like, all right, there's that guy, Santiago. I think he's in Mexico City. So I found his phone number in my email, text him, and within like 10 seconds, he wrote back and is like, oh, I have this opening tonight for a short film and a book. And so I ended up going, and we connected a couple times over the trip, and it was just like beautiful. And it kind of like connecting about his work and my work and maybe future work together. And uh, while I was there, you know, you wrote me about this podcast, and I thought, oh, like that's interesting. Like all these energies are sort of just all the points of this connection are happening right now. But then I realized that that was sort of random that you had reached out, and I ascribed a certain level of meaning to that. And so I know there's a term that I recently learned called apophenia in psychology, which is essentially the dry way of saying synchronicity, but it's the opposite. It's saying like you're just ascribing meaning to things that don't have meaning, sort of creating patterns and looking for them. Um, and that is a thing. And I know that's a human thing. It's been studied and it's sort of a known. But at the same time, I have to put that up against the instances where I have small synchronicities and sometimes quite large, where they have so much meaning that it's difficult for me to ignore. And by ignoring it, I feel I'm doing a disservice to something in my life that's beyond that isolated sense of self. It sort of creates cracks. And there's a playfulness to it that's like there's more than meets the eye in a way. So I'm curious for you, what comes up for you when I mention synchronicity or apophenia, however you want to look at it, and if what are the mechanisms that maybe have or still are breaking through for you to break through this sort of despair of feeling like we're just in a vast sea of me's.
I mean, uh, it's a great question. I mean, one of the difficult things about this pandemic for me, and I don't pretend my experience is universal. I don't know, how universal or shared it is, but I certainly felt like life became way less meaningful. Like I had a harder time understanding what I found meaningful about it. I had a harder time discovering meaning. And just to give you like a pretty basic example, I mean, I've done like a pretty good job throughout the pandemic of recording my dreams. I might have taken off, a few months here and there, but I'm one day 175 of my current uh, dream journal, and I used to dream and have a sense of what my dreams meant. Like I would have quite powerful experiences of my own interpretation of the dream when I would
Mm.
think about it. And now I just sort of record them, and they're very detailed and vivid, and they're very rich. But I have a much harder time having a strong sense of what they're about, like what my psyche is trying to tell me.
Mm.
And I have a friend who I have a group chat with two friends. One who's a big believer in psychic phenomena and has had personal experiences that he's somebody who began as a skeptic and then just had an experience with a professor that was so profound it changed his whole life. And he'll try to put dream images or objects into my head. He was training me to lucid dream for a bit, me and my friend. Like I'm really working the dream space, trying to discover ways to meaning again, through this activity that I view as really profound. And that's an area where I think you get into psychic ideas and communication between people who are far away. I think I can't remember if we talked about this in an earlier chat. I think we must have, but when we got in touch again when I was dealing with illness and you had just had a surgery, and I had a
Yeah.
really powerful dream of you kind of driving in a car onto my childhood lawn. Um, and I still remember some details from it. Um, so that space to me is one where I like to believe there's a lot of new meaning, meanings beyond our understanding. But I just haven't gotten there yet. Like I haven't, that work hasn't paid off with any kind of concrete insight or discovery of new levels of meaning yet for me.
Well, actually, I'm remembering our first podcast. We did talk about this. I mean, it keeps coming up between us. But I had the discovery on the podcast that like 20 years ago when I moved to New York and we had met, and went through depression, and I was given by a cognitive behavioral therapist the book Feeling Good. And I either gave it to you or you borrowed it from me. And you told me how you were like, this book is ridiculous. The story of the guy who lost his leg and then he's supposed to just feel better. He lost his fucking leg. And you were like, screw this book. And then months later or years later, you told me, I changed my mind. Actually, it's amazing. I think it's thoughts connected to feelings. And then many years later, you losing a leg in real life.
Yeah.
If you, I don't know about you, but I see that as amazing. I'm not saying I know what it means, but that happened, that I remember. I don't know why I even remember that conversation. We had hundreds of conversations, but I remember walking on the street with you on Cleveland Place or somewhere in Soho when you said that.
Well, don't you think? I mean, this is a different example, and there's something particularly mystical about it. But we're talking now with tensions between Ukraine and Russia are very high, and who knows what's going to happen? There could be a war. And I remember reading about this the other day. What's happening there made me remember you and I having a conversation about the Iraq War. I think maybe even you were moving, or maybe moving into an apartment, or but I remember, that post 9/11, those wars were starting up, and I thought, wow, like I have a vivid memory of a brief conversation, with you about the Iraq War, and just reading about what's happening in Ukraine and Russia made me think of it. I mean, and we met almost exactly 20 years ago, by the way.
We did.
You,
Oh
you
yeah.
probably came in to understudy the play right around opening, which was 2002, February, like
Wow.
mid February 2002. So it's almost exactly 20 years since we met.
Oh my
But
God.
I think all those kinds of connections. I mean, some maybe you're just making them on a logical level, like, oh, this war, and I remember that war, and I'm talking soon, and so I'm going to think about you. But I don't know. I mean, I think these things, experiences of other people, live in us so deeply and resonate in so many mysterious ways. And again, like I would link this to how I feel confused about the moment we're in the sense of so many people just seem to live on their phones, like live on the surface. And so I wonder, like, how does that potential connection between people and among people, how does that work when there isn't the inwardness or the space for these deeper resonances to emerge? I mean, you need a certain kind of psychic quiet and privacy to follow a chain of associations in your mind that, hey, maybe random and coincidental, but also maybe driven by mystery and meaning. And it feels so paradoxical to me that I can feel still with some people like, okay, I have a connection, a psychic connection to a handful of people in my life that is deep and real and true. And then I have relationships with, hundreds of others that level is never reached. It's never accessed in any way that reaches awareness. And, that's just a weird feeling to me. Like there's a weird uh, lack of continuity in how I interact with people.
Well, as far as what you said about, uh, you know, people being inundated with their phones and what the effects of that and what we do with it. I mean, if anything, I think what we're lacking is more like these embodied experiences, essentially getting out of our heads, whether it's being physical or losing our ability, if we ever had it, for some of us to be able to communicate with the messages coming from our body and our environment. And it's just becoming so externalized, whether we think about it or we're just sort of shown things or told things via screen. uh, I think that's problematic. So I mean, in some ways, if there's any sort of anecdote that people can do, it's like getting into forms of practice, whether it's walking, running, yoga, whatever. Just being a bit more physical, as a way of engaging with the space around us, because I think a lot of it too is becoming more sedentary in a sense.
Well, all right. Here's how I'll push back on that. It's not that I disagree with you uh, so much as like I have a different spin on it, and this is my issue with psychedelics
Please.
too. Why I think psychedelics are really overrated as a tool. We're always returning back to the world the way it is, and so if the world is becoming more and more digitally mediated, more and more surface, more and more superficial, whatever we do to go to a deeper place and get outside of our egos and outside of ourselves, we're always returning to this world with its same social problems, maybe even worse, and this cultural energy of superficiality and individualism. So I think what saddens me or worries me is like, is my future just a retreat into a private world of me and the people who more or less see the world the way I do, who don't want everything to be mediated by technology, who want a physical life, who want to attend to the psyche. Like, will it just be the I hate using the word enlightened because I don't really believe anybody's enlightened, but you know what I mean by that. Like the enlightened people, or the aware people, or people who want to feel and live more deeply outside of technology, whatever.
Mm.
Is it just that we're all going to retreat to our own sort of little private world, and then the rest of the world is going to go into this, technological psychosis? And like, because I still want to believe that there could be a common culture that I don't have to give up on the idea of like the entire bulk of the mainstream. Like I want to believe there's a way that we could avoid apocalypse. I want to believe there's a way not everybody will get addicted to technology. That I'm not just trying to imagine a world where 3 to 4% of people are really deep and thoughtful, and we just sort of live our lives out while the rest of the world goes on its way towards apocalypse. Like, so that to me, and you know, it's not that I think psychedelic therapy isn't something that can be individually useful. It just doesn't do anything really for the world. And
Okay.
it doesn't change the world itself. So I feel like we're always returning whatever insights we glean. We're always returning to this world that is just out of control with individualism and addiction to technology.
Well, it's true that the tide is great in this world of all these problems you're talking about, but I'd also push back and say that the only way change ever happens is from the individual outward, and it's sort of a tug and a pull and a give and a take. It's kind of always happening, whether that aggregate crosses some kind of bell curve where like now it's more benevolent than malevolent. Yeah, I don't feel like we're there yet, but I, I just feel like from my own experience, certain psychedelic experiences, the way they've helped me is that when I come back, so to speak, into three-dimensional day-to-day reality, it's helped me change my perspective and beliefs that I choose to hold, and that so that I'm able to operate in this world with less depression, anxiety, and I have more of a sense of overarching meaning, because I feel like I've felt things that felt very real to me, and I just that happened to me, like kinds of understandings about connection and meaning. And the way it helps me is that I get a little less, well, hopefully a lot less caught up in the bullshit or like the fights or the this, even when things are really bad. Like this happened to me when I had my second bicycle accident and my arm was all messed up. As soon as I hit the pavement, I remember I had this like moment where on one hand I knew everything horrible that was going to happen that day and for the next many months, and just the heaviness of the depression of that thought and the pain and everything that was going to happen. But because of experiences I had recently had with psychedelics, there was also this quiescence that existed at the same time where I actually just sat there and sort of was like, but it really doesn't matter. It's okay. Not like in a nihilistic way. I was like, it's okay. Like the the pain, the pleasure, it's all just sort of a dance inside of this other thing that I felt like I had a taste of, that was a real taste, and that wasn't ever gonna go away from me. And how does that change the world? I don't know, but it changed me, and I'm part of the world, and I don't know if that would happen to other people. I've seen it happen in different ways, but the biggest thing I've seen with other people is the healing of traumas, or the gradual healing of traumas that they've accrued in their lives, large and small. And to me, that's probably the biggest issue that we're dealing with, that, fans out into all these different symptoms of problems, is coming from forms of trauma, perhaps even some of the addictions we face with technology, perhaps.
I mean, I do think. I mean, I certainly had very powerful experiences with LSD in my early 20s, and I think there are individuals who benefit really greatly from using these drugs. I mean, at the same time, there's people. I mean, one of the biggest proponents of psychedelics online is this guy Mike Cernovich, who's like basically a fascist, right wing Trump propagandist guy who like is done all these drugs and is still a fascist. And
Yeah.
so there's that issue. But let me try to say this in a way where I'm just really speaking for myself, and it doesn't come off like I'm just trashing society. Um, like, yeah, I think your story, of the thoughts and feelings you had after your bike accident, uh, I completely resonate with that. And I do think when individuals start to get better and heal psychologically, like there's a ripple effect of their, being a better person with others, and that impacts their community in a meaningful way. I guess what is hard for me to come to terms with is, like, I used to feel those differences much more powerfully. I think because I wasn't always hooked into uh, a visible world of thousand. I can't exactly estimate how many people's tweets or posts I see a day, but it's probably in the thousands, right? So I'm constantly being reminded that there's a world. I mean, I'll make it concrete for a second. Um, one of the projects I'm working on is a screenplay set in early COVID New York City, and it's not about that. It's a love story, but that is the backdrop. And so it's meant just I've been immersed in that world of research for a while now, and I'm just also interested in it as a person. Um, like when I started to see the right wing misinformation, if you're being less charitable, disinformation. When I started to see how powerful that was, like
Mm.
how many people believed it, including sometimes people I know and respect, gave it more credence than I would have expected. Um, like I just found that very hard to accept because I was seeing the rates of illness, I was seeing how many people were dying, I was reading all the statistics about how well the vaccines were working. I was talking to ICU nurses as part of my research, and I was hearing about what it's like to be really sick with COVID and to die from it. All these very kind of basic, clear realities. And, then I'm listening to Joe Rogan have, highly credentialed guests on who are saying things that are not true, partially true, and are folding in what they're saying to a kind of grand conspiracy narrative. And I'm realizing millions of people find this completely compelling and, have such a hatred for the mainstream that
Mm.
they are, denying things that, are pretty solid and pretty factual. Like I wouldn't have known, 20 years ago that there were millions and millions of those people, and there wouldn't have been a Rogan figure who was so wildly popular, who would be, giving credence to really outrageous conspiracy theories about COVID. So, like, I think the thing that's hard for me is trying to figure out, okay, like, I was sort of in denial about how much madness there is in the world. I knew there was madness. Like if you look at my plays, like I was always
Yeah.
really trying to write like deep, serious things, and I recognize that there's messed up stuff going on. But like I really feel like I understated it, and and I think the sort of double impact of Trump and COVID just really shocked me. Like those were two things that I just didn't the couldn't anticipate, like the public reaction to clearly a very very destructive and cruel human being, and then the public reaction to very deadly virus that thank God we found reasonably successful ways of countering. Like I just wouldn't have ever been able to understand 20 years ago how many people would be on the side of a cruel, vicious, narcissistic leader, and who would have believed, obvious falsehoods about a really threatening and tragic disease. So, like for me, it's like, okay, the world is like way worse than I thought, and so what? Like again, what do I do? Do I just retreat into my own little private sphere because that's all I can do? Maybe that is the answer. It's just like not a. It's not one that comes easily to me. Like I want to feel like there's some other relationship I can have to these forces in the mainstream of the culture. May not be the whole culture, but are a huge part of it.
Well, maybe, I mean, sounds like you're getting a lot of that information yourself, consuming a lot of the tweets and so forth. I mean, there is like an information sickness type syndrome where it's just too much. I mean, if you know too much, we were never meant to know all this information. It was just not part of our nervous systems. I mean, you could probably argue that it's irrelevant, most of it, other than making us feel shitty. I mean, have you compared any times to where you've taken any sort of fast of media and how it's changed how you felt?
I mean, I definitely feel. I mean, I've really restricted my social media use in the last year and a half for sure. Um, but it always feels like too much whatever I do. Look, I want to know what's going on. If there's 11 million people listening to somebody say, the vaccines are dangerous if you're healthy, or whatever. Like, I want to know that. I'm an artist. I care about the world and the culture that I'm in. So again, that gets to that question of, well, is the solution just to sort of retreat into my private sphere? And again, maybe it is. And, maybe I've, my eyes have been open to a reality that, was always there, and I just sort of found ways to deny it, or found ways around it, or found ways to minimize it. But that's what's new for me, is really seeing like, okay, it really is this bad. Like, like Donald Trump could become president again.
Right.
And if we had another virus, and it was worse, so with a higher fatality rate, we'd have millions and millions of people dying and hospitals collapsing. And, like that's hard for me, and it's hard for me to just accept, like, okay, you know, that's how it's going to be. And I'll just try to, have my happy life over here in the corner.
It is no doubt like a stressful time, and people like yourself are very introspective and paying attention. I think a lot of people, maybe you could argue why all these other things are taking off, these forms of distraction, is because it's just too hard to look at it truthfully, or it's far too painful to engage with the total madness and destruction that's around us. I mean, it's the unveiling, it's the apocalypse. It's things being completely, the curtain pulled back. It's no longer a time of where we just had several decades of relative just total peacefulness here on our shores. And yeah, things were pretty messed up in different parts of the world, but from our perspective, it's like, especially our generations with like war and so forth, there's no meaningful threat of being drafted. That just seems absurd. Like that idea. But my dad was drafted. That was like a real thing.
Yeah.
This is just a different time, and we had it. We had it pretty. It was pretty easy going for a long time, and now it's like it's come to our shores where Rome is falling apart, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be put back together in any meaningful way. Certainly, there's no way it can ever go back to how it was, even just our standing in the world. So these are truly untethered times where when the culture itself is becoming so fractured, and you and I, being an artist, you're essentially a mirror of sorts to the culture around you. And when that is breaking down, it is destabilizing. You don't really know always how to react to it. And I would imagine, and some of that reaction maybe you're feeling and I'm feeling right now, is ambiguity too, of like, I don't know. Like, I don't have my counter narrative, or here's my particular point of view that I'm trying to get across. It's sort of me trying to process it myself. And if I had to say, like, my reflection of what you're saying, how that manifests in my life, it's it's feeling really confused about touring, confused about engaging in that stream that we're talking about. That just doesn't. It feels so problematic, and it's like trying to do it in a nuanced way, but feeling how flawed it is. And then on the other hand, recognizing that if I don't stay creative, whether or not it's commercialized, I'm just not going to be happy. And that's a mild way of putting it. Like, I have to have that output to keep my head on straight. And I'm in my own sort of like Ouroboros of creation, where it's like I have to keep doing it, which is good for me, but it's also like I'm inside a system that's broken, but trying to be subversive to it. But it's always going to be this both and. So I feel the contradictions too, but I'm also like trying to feel okay with that ambiguity and saying, like, it feels like a process. And I don't know how long that process goes on. Maybe it goes on my whole life, but maybe it's a few years. But boy, are we in a like a turning, or a spiraling of sorts. And it's very, very unknown where that goes and how to respond to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything you say makes sense, and like me being maybe slightly more of a pessimist or a cynic, like what you term ambiguity, I might just call despair for myself.
Yeah.
That where I feel like, and I should clarify too, like when I was younger and thinking of my plays as like making an impact in the world, I also thought of it in terms of like my plays are a part of the American theater, which is making an impact. And like I saw my work as sort of a part of a collective. Not that I liked every play out there, but I sort of thought, okay, artists are trying to do something deep and communicate it. And when you add up all the great art together, you could sort of imagine, like, yeah, like this is doing something, you know, really positive for the world. So it was maybe a little less grandiose than it sounds if I'm just talking about my individual plays. But yeah, I feel like the what I have to kind of become comfortable with, I guess, is a feeling of I don't really think it does much in terms of what I wanted my work to do. I don't think my work does that anymore, which makes me feel despair, depression, anger, exhaustion. But I'm going to keep doing it. I guess that would be the formula, at least for now. I'm not ready to walk away from it, and probably like you, I suspect that if I did, if I stopped creating, I would start to go mad.
Well,
Um,
hey, in feeling good, Chris, they call that black and white thinking. And I'd say, is that really true that your work has no meaning? And I mean, it's not true. You just really what you're saying is it has, from your point of view, less meaning, or it's less impactful. But it is impactful. You are a very talented and skilled writer who writes very thoughtful, extremely thoughtful and nuanced work that is purposeful to me in this world for just for that, for someone putting out there something that has depth. Whether or not you think that's going to like have as much impact as it did 20 years ago, that's your own perception. But look, I can tell you that I meet people, and I'm sure you hear from people out there who engage with your work, and they might be telling you things about what meaning it had for them and how that aligned with something in their life that is sort of like crazy to hear, like how important that was for them, or the way the synchronicity they had with it, in essence. That I really don't feel I have much to do with, but nonetheless, I'm hearing that story from them. And so it might not be giving you the nourishment you felt it did in this moment in time, but I'm sure it's giving nourishment to certain individuals out there, whether it's 100 versus a million. That's what sort of the psychedelics have shown me, in a sense. It's like that's sort of our worldly view, that one is a bigger number. Yes, it is, but that doesn't mean one has more meaning or significance. I just don't feel I can fully understand like that butterfly effect. It's meaning is not really quantifiable in a sense. It just
yeah,
is.
for sure. And I don't want to understate how meaningful it is when people tell me, my work has meant something to them, impacted them. It does mean a lot. Um, so I think that element of it has remained, but it's that bigger picture and where I fit into it. And then again, it's not even about popularity or reach so much as it's just like looking at the world the way it is and being like, okay, like this is bad and worse than I ever thought, and I would like to participate in a way to make it better, but I don't know how. And what I thought I did that could do that, I don't feel does that in the way that I hoped it would. And it's like that guy Jaron Lanier. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. But when I listen to him talk on podcasts and talk about getting rid of social media, it's clear that like he has a vision of a world that could be better. If some certain things changed in a big way. And I always want to like get behind what he says because I love that idea of somebody still having a collective vision, right? That isn't
Yeah.
it isn't just a vision of individuals maximizing their pleasure, but you know, an understanding that we are a society, we're a culture. We have to figure out a way together to build something healthy. Um, but it's hard. I mean, that Sharon is a persuasive, charismatic figure, and obviously most people haven't given up their social media. Um, so I think it all returns to those questions for me of like what my relationship can be to the broader mainstream culture. And I don't mean to sound completely pessimistic, although I know it probably does come off that way. But it's really me facing a frustration of, man, I haven't figured it out yet. I haven't figured
Mm,
out what that thing is that makes me feel like, wow, okay, I can participate in something mainstream, popular, like part of the broad culture, and feel optimism, feel hope.
mm.
Um, and I know I have probably grandiose fantasies of if I were talking to Joe Rogan, I could talk in a different way. I could reach him in a way that maybe the kind of typical person that would annoy him, couldn't, or whatever. But like those kinds of fantasies of, are there different ways of talking to each other? There are different ways of behaving, different kinds of conversations that can make an impact in a different way. But yeah, I'm just, yeah, I'm lost. I'm trying to figure out what, other than just complete retreat into a private zone. I'm trying to figure out what it is I can do to feel more part of the mainstream of my culture.
I would say that, from a creative standpoint, like this is the plenum of unknown where anything is possible. There's always infinite possibilities in front of us, and that means truly anything from the horrible to the wonderful. But another perspective of looking at the place you feel you're at is that you are figuring it out. This is figuring it out. The lostness is part of that process. It's not one of being perpetually lost. It's one of shattering beliefs so that you can create, or finding a new place to stand from, new perspectives. I mean, in some ways, I see it somewhat positively that the things that will come out of it will have new meaning for you and a fresh perspective, and perhaps like probably something that's, whatever process you're going through, others are going through this as well. I mean, I know we're all feeling, as I said, destabilized, uh, as you're speaking to, and I think you're just being really honest about it. A lot of us are kind of glossing over it in different ways, but we all feel that, man. And yeah, the from a spiritual perspective, I like to think like, well, if we're all a bunch of brave souls, it's like this is a really difficult time to be alive for certain reasons. And I can honor the parts of people that are trying at least to forge something new and how difficult that is. And if people fail at that, they fail at that, but I do see a lot of people at least trying. I mean, I don't know about you, but a lot of people have had to reckon with patterns in their lives, or they've had fresh opportunities, and they've actually been making some fairly significant changes, whether work or how they were actually living or practices they had that they've jettisoned, and they're really trying to do something different, or things were breaking down, like toxic relationships, or jobs that they have that didn't feel it was really working out. It feels like the beginning of something that's probably quite a long process, and unfortunately, you know, from a civilization point of view, it probably is going to be pretty destructive and go on for quite a while to really like. There was no meaningful way to take the systems we've had percolating and have that turn into a utopia. It's just far too broken. And you're speaking to it and like the unveiling of it through like, Trump and pandemics, and how it just laid bare things that we never really dreamed were actually true in such mass numbers. But it's almost like you got to burn the house down, burn the fields to plant a new crop. And that's horrible and scary, but maybe not just inevitable, but needed. And so you're right. The work you did before was in a particular landscape that isn't here right now. and looking to like what you wish to make in this new landscape that's like so dynamic and changing, continuing to change. Yeah, that is unknown. And there is a despair with that. But there's a hope on the other side of that something new is emerging. I can hear it in you if you can't hear it. And maybe the job we have for each other is just to witness that and say, look, man, I see it happening and I believe in you. And it's not to say there's like some destination there, but I still believe in and looking forward to what you continue to create.
Well, and I appreciate that. And I certainly haven't given up hope. I mean, I think one reason I've persisted in keeping this dream journal is a feeling of like, okay, I'll look back, at some point, maybe on these, whatever it is, 400, 500 entries. And I'll, have enough distance on that time and I'll start to see patterns and meanings develop that I was unable to perceive when I was having the dreams. And I think you always have to maintain hope that new understandings and new meanings can emerge. And I think also that you have to really accept that these things unfold very slowly. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
change and understanding. I mean, these are things that are on a potentially, not always. Sometimes you can have a flash of inspiration, but often, if not usually, in my experience, these kinds of changes take years, and we're really just at the start of understanding what the last couple of years have been, and I think there probably is the strongest place you'll find my optimism that you keep living because you never know what you'll learn and discover in 6 months, in 5 years, in 10 years. And, there's something immensely thrilling and hope inspiring, about recognizing that there are things we don't know now that we will know. But we're going to have to keep living and living well to learn them.
Maybe you've just been in New York too long. I mean, maybe it's New Yorker syndrome.
I would like to live somewhere else eventually, for sure. I'd like to be maybe in the desert.
Oh, you're welcome to come out to the desert, man. I mean, if you're not tethered to the American theater, then you truly could be free.
There you go. That's the real reason to get out of the theater. I can finally move somewhere else.
You can. You can. Yeah, you'd be more than welcome out in southern Utah, or you could go out to New Mexico. It's beautiful. It's I mean, one of the things I found about going out to those landscapes is pretty much just what we're kind of talking about, how different it was. Like totally different than how I grew up or being in an urban environment, and how nourishing I felt that change to be and still do. It's just like, wow, this is a whole different ball game and ball of energy here.
Yeah, I mean, my grandmother, her second husband, was a newscaster for NBC, and he developed asthma, and he was fired, and he was very bitter about it, and so he moved her. I mean, now it's a kind of a cheesy place, but he and my grandmother moved to Lake Havasu City, Arizona, way back. When it's like population of a few thousand, and so all my childhood we would go there every summer. So I have all these early memories of driving from Vegas to Lake Havasu and just falling in love with that landscape and just understanding there was something profoundly different about it. And it's really nestled deep inside my psyche as a very special place. And so I've always wanted someday to end up back in the desert.
Yeah, it sounds like a trip there is overdue. I was actually just in Vegas and Arizona a couple days ago. That's the two places I just had a couple shows. And so I was in that area. And on one hand, I'm flying through Vegas and Phoenix. It's like two places that feel like talk about, a sinking ship as far as climate and society and how we live. Um, but on the other hand, there's parts of that country that are so beautiful. And I mean that's why I love getting out, man, on hikes and getting out into the backcountry. Because when I'm out there, I'll be looking at landscapes that really haven't changed in thousands of years at all. A lot of these rocks, and I'm like, whoever was here before me is exactly what it looked like, and it's sort of connecting and something soothing about that, because like all the other stuff, it just doesn't matter at all. It's just that stuff just keeps turning and moving, and it's a little more grounding, so I don't get too worked up in all the business of art and commerce colliding that
Yeah.
is our lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, I believe in you. What I appreciate about our conversations beyond our history, which is valuable to have that with people, is I love your honesty in sharing things like despair. I mean, that talk about something that people don't. In some ways, it's an anecdote to a lot of social media, which is either completely vapid or filtered, glossy life. You know.
Well, and I think, what really bothers me too about art and entertainment now is so many artists like portray themselves as like, super confident, like unbelievably aware of, who they are and what they feel, and, constantly finding ways to articulate how desirable they are and how radical they are. And like, it drives me crazy because, like, to me the purpose of art is not to create yourself as a kind of artist figure who is appealing and desirable, but it's just to be honest, and so I always feel when I talk to you, and I try to talk like this really all the time, but it's more with you, maybe more pronounced because we've known each other so long, and I really trust you. But like, I often feel like, oh, like, I'm not supposed to do this anymore. Like, this is, I'm supposed to like portray myself as like powerful and desirable at every turn. And that's how people will hire me, because they'll be like, oh, this person's so desirable and powerful. And, it just drives me crazy. So if anything, I probably err on the side of overemphasizing, my doubts and my anxieties, just because I think that, like, what else are we doing? I mean, the point of being an artist is to inhabit these uncertainties, and even being an entertainer, even if you just limit it to that, I feel like it's entertainment exists to take us away from ourselves, but in a way that also plays with our fears and anxieties and uncertainties. So
Yeah. Yeah, man. Well, it's I don't know, man. It's a strange time to be an artist, but it's a great time too. And I mean, on the other side of that is like at least we can make things and have there are more options and outlets. I mean, for myself, I what I do never would have existed in earlier eras. It only could have existed in this era where I could just basically put stuff out and pretty much explore whatever I want to explore. And because of things like the internet, you can find the others who have similar interests. And even if that's nichey, it can be just enough people to create a world for yourself, like a little uh, something to create. Just keep doing it. I just find deep value in creation and creating, and I think for all of us, it's a really necessary muscle. So I feel really grateful to be able to do that as my work, as opposed to something I have to do on top of my work, because I don't know how I would keep my head on straight if I couldn't keep that wheel turning. It feels like even if I'm just playing piano for myself, it's just as meaningful if I record it or something and turn that into some kind of public or thing. It feels just as meaningful. That doesn't really make sense, but I feel that.
mm,
And I that's why I feel like you doing in some ways like your dream journal is just as meaningful as like a screenplay or a play you write that gets produced. I really do. And that breaks through any logic, but those kind of feelings I feel in my heart about it, I hold on to those because there's a truth to it that I don't want to get too diluted with my own negativity or rationalism. I spent a lot of years trying to get away from that.
yeah.
That's how I grew up with my family. It was just like hardcore materialism and rationalism. And in a lot of ways, that's why I do what I do now, is because I'm reacting against that. But I see that as a gift and I see meaning in that. And part part of me wants to hold on to that. Even if it is delusional, I still want to hold on to it.
Yeah.
Oh God. Well, always good to talk, man.
Yeah.
Always good to hear your voice, and I know you well enough to even when I hear you say all this, I actually hear you thriving. So it's you exploring and being the wonderful artist you are, just like digging into it and getting into the mud and being like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
It's good. It's
That's
good,
nice
man.
to hear. Good. I'm glad you hear that.
I do. I do. And I mean, your work does rest. It always has. I mean, whether you think it's different or something, you've always dealt with some really complex and dark issues, and that's what made a lot of your work so interesting. So it's like you're talking about some of that darkness now, and if that's a role that you play for us, keep doing it, man. I mean, whatever
Yeah.
you want to do, but that's needed too, very much so.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
All right. Well, I hope you make a lot of money with these new projects and feel super inspired and just do whatever the hell you want and just feel excited by what you're creating.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I'll take that.
All right, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.